Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for our Fresh Squeezed 9 gallery talk. Tonight, we're going to hear from two artists in this year's exhibition, Hannah Keats and Ryan Toth. So this is the fourth of four gallery talks that we've had since the show opened in April that feature artists in Fresh Squeeze 9. So if you're interested in listening in on the other three talks that preceded this one, you can go to moreanartcenter.org and find the links there, or you can go directly to the Morean Art Center's YouTube channel to find those. My name is Amanda Cooper, and I'm the Chief Curator for the Morean Art Center. Here is a photo of the Morean. If you haven't been here before, we are a 108-year-old community art center, and we're located in beautiful downtown St. Petersburg, Florida. Fresh Squeeze 9 is on view here at the Morean through June 26th, and we invite you to come and see the show in person if you can. Before we get started with our talk tonight, I wanted to thank our exhibition sponsors. We have Lisa and Perry Everett, who are longtime friends and supporters of the Morean Art Center, and also the Gobioff Foundation. The Gobioff Foundation is an incredible asset to the Tampa Bay arts community. And if you don't know about them, especially if you're an arts institution or a Bay Area artist, you definitely should look them up. So these next few slides are, they feature the artists in the exhibition, the ones who aren't speaking tonight. We're gonna just briefly look at the other 6 artists. There's 8 altogether. And in case you don't know what Fresh Squeezed is, if this is the first time you're hearing about it, or if you've not seen a talk or seen a show in person here before, the idea for Fresh Squeeze came about in 2017. That was the year that the Morean, we were celebrating our 100th anniversary. And for over a century, we've nurtured the careers of emerging artists, and we wanted to move into the next 100 years doing it in a thoughtful and intentional way. So each year for Fresh Squeeze, we post a call for entry to emerging artists, and each year we have anywhere from 100 to 200 artists apply. And out of all those applications, we only select 6 to 8 artists for the exhibition, so it's very competitive. In the 9 years that we have been hosting Fresh Squeeze, we've exhibited artwork from 56 artists representing 23 Florida cities. So it really is a statewide exhibition. And if you're interested in seeing all 56 of these artists from the last 9 years, again, if you go to moreanartcenter.org and find the Fresh Squeezed button, you will see an archive link there. And if you're watching this and you happen to be an emerging artist living in Florida and you're interested in applying for next year, we do post the call for entry in late summer, and then there's a late November deadline. So we hope you'll consider doing that. Next year, we are going to celebrate 10 years of Fresh Squeezed, and I'm very excited about that. So on to our artists who will be presenting tonight. I'm very excited to hear from both of them. We'll be hearing from 2 artists, and they will be presenting one after another. And if you have any questions for either or both of these artists, if you would just type it into the chat feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll address both questions for both artists at the end of the second artist presentation. So the first artist we'll be hearing from tonight is Hannah Keats. Hannah recently earned her MFA from Florida State University, and she currently resides in Tallahassee. And then after we hear from Hannah, we'll be hearing from our second artist is Ryan Toth. He is a painter and a sculptor with a BFA from the Cooper Union, and he currently resides in West Palm Beach. And here's an image of his work in the gallery. Both artists draw inspiration from nature, but with totally different approaches and results. So that's sort of the idea behind us pairing the 2 of them together tonight for a talk. Thank you, Ryan and Hannah, for joining us tonight. We are super excited to hear about your work. And remember, those in the audience, if you could please type any questions you have in the chat, and we will address them at the end. So that's it for an introduction. And Hannah, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Hannah Keats. I am a painter and installation artist based in Tallahassee, Florida. My work focuses primarily on coral and fungi and creating abstract works inspired by those. So, with that being said, I'm going to start my talk. So, have you ever read a story so vivid that you can picture a place you've never visited? Science fiction and art have the power to transport us to other realms and immerse us in fantastical worlds that we can only ever imagine. Drawing from the forms and beauty of nature and Florida's diverse ecosystems, I create worlds through installations, new media work, and paintings that mirror the shapes and colors of coral reefs, fungi, and sea creatures. Allow me for a moment to read a quote from one of my favorite books by Jeff Vandermeer. The tower, which was not supposed to be there, plunges into the earth in a place just before the black pine forest begins to give way to swamp, and then the reeds and wind-gnarled trees of the marsh flats. Beyond the marsh flats and the natural canals lies the ocean, and a little farther down the coast, a derelict lighthouse. All of this part of the country have been abandoned for decades, for reasons that are not easy to relate. Inspired by St. Mark's Wildlife Refuge along Florida's Forgotten Coast, Vandermeer paints a picture of a landscape through words, poetically inviting readers into the space he frequently writes in. Oh, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay. Just as the nature that surrounds Vandermeer guides his creations, the language and textures of the natural world and the environment of Florida guide my hand in the studio every day. Dreaming of the Florida landscape and the oceanic ecosystems of the Atlantic, I create abstract works in the form of paintings and installations using oil and acrylic paint, collage, and digital fabrication techniques to build worlds. Exploration is the first step of my process as I visit beaches, nature centers, and aquariums to take photos, draw on my sketchbook, and write. Right now, I am spending a lot of time looking at coral and aquarium touch tanks. If there's a touch tank at an aquarium, I will usually be there for at least an hour or two, to the detriment of my husband. So, so transporting you to my practice now, we'll begin to see how I create worlds and try to spark joy and wonder through my work for viewers. So beginning at the microscopic level and going to the macroscopic, I look at coral on the surface, looking at the delicate forms that are almost mirroring porcelain and the stark beauty of all the different lines and forms. And then I'm also really drawn to how coral looks underneath a microscope. So both views are extremely stunning, but they present a very different view of the same thing. So through my paintings, I draw from what I'm seeing under a microscope as well as what I'm seeing at the surface level. So after doing a lot of sketches and going and studying different subject matter, I go to the drawing and sketching stage where I'm creating forms on the computer and in my sketchbook, and then translating them through laser cutting and CNC routing in order to create surfaces and different collage elements that I then bring into the paintings to create these sculptural pieces. As well as that, I also create paintings on wood panel that then become things that I take photos of and turn into patterns that I can also use within my sculptural paintings and installations. So beyond my process and the things I'm inspired by, camouflage is a really big part of my practice. I like to create patterns based on the subject matter I'm looking at and from my paintings, and play with optical illusions and different ways of messing with spaces. So one of the ways I do that is for wallpaper. This is an installation piece I created in 2022, inspired by lionfish in Florida. So this work is titled Invasion, and it uses oil painting and pattern making to explore how the exotic animal market in Florida has led to the rise of the term invasive species, and how our perception of that word and the use of camouflage kind of impact how we see Florida's ecosystems. So going beyond the wall, my work oftentimes drips onto the floor. So this is kind of my first segue into using the floor as well as the wall. So after I created that piece, I started to get more into coral and looking at the fragility of coral as well as different ways I can use pattern to play with space. This is a floor piece that I did in 2023. And I started to utilize the glitch to create patterns as well as my paintings. And I started to really scale up what I was doing on the floor. This piece is 15 by 12. And beyond using digital printing and laying it on the floor, I also started to play with textiles a little bit to give you more of a tactile feel with the work. So the big black spot on the work is actually Sherpa. So you can kind of sit within the installation or you can walk on the installation. But the different ways you interact with it kind of show the different ways we interact with coral and the fragility of the environment. So this next piece that I wanted to show is breakdown. So starting to think about placing these coral ecosystems in spaces and give people a way to access some of the things that I'm thinking about. This work actually uses QR codes on laser cut panels. And if you look at the QR codes, it'll take you to a piece of my website that talks about coral reefs and a lot of the issues they're facing in Florida. And this piece is just kind of fun. I had a lot of engagement from it. And just thinking about color and texture with this work and kind of treating it like a collage within space. After that work, these two pieces are some of the work I did in Berlin, Germany, that kind of led into the work I did for Fresh Squeezed. So really playing with just pure glitch and creating these coral-like forms that aren't really coral. I installed them in our tiny Berlin apartment that we had, and seeing how people reacted in Germany was really interesting because the subject matter is so far removed from what a lot of the people in that area are making in terms of art. So it just felt very alienated from the space. So it was very interesting to see what happened when I talked about coral and all these things that are happening somewhere where they're not seeing it happen themselves. So going to my work that I have in Fresh Squeezed, I wanted to start with my work, Rhizome. So this was inspired by the lotus pods that come up in spring. There's a lake by our house that we really like to go to. And every spring there's these really beautiful lotus pods, and they have all these really interesting seed pods, and they have like holes and pores. And I was just really thinking about growth and rebirth and kind of like these things coming out of a mud to create something really beautiful. And kind of thinking about how we're connected to nature through this cycle. So going a little bit beyond coral, this is getting a little bit more symbolic. So here's a close-up of that work. So on all my bigger installation pieces, I use a mix of CNC routing with laser cutting to create illusionary spaces. And there's a lot of acrylic inlays and wood inlays, as well as digital prints on that I've kind of collaged into the work. So you kind of lose different elements of the space. So here's another close-up. The wall color is Diva Queen, and it's the wall color we ended up using for the Fresh Squeezed exhibit as the accent color. But it's just a fun color. It kind of reminded me of just really bright Florida coral reef ecosystems, and just some of the bright fish that are around there. So the next work I wanted to talk about was Mesh, which is one of the smaller lenticular pieces that I've done recently. This mirrors a lot of the work that I have in Fresh Squeezed. So using patterns that I've created from my paintings, I've been creating lenticular prints that I then laser cut and adhere to panel. So the lenticular prints are really fun. So it's a double image that I put into one and print, and then I adhere the lens to it. And the certain number of pixels that are in the lens allow it so the image kind of shifts as you walk around it. So some of my smaller works that are in fresh squeezed, if you look at them, they'll kind of shift the more you move around a space. So here's a side view of that. Lenticular prints are also really fun because you get kind of a ghosting. So you don't totally lose the image on some of them. Some of them kind of have this lasting like pop of the ever image. So the next work I wanted to talk about that's in fresh squeezed is this piece. So this piece I'm utilizing lenticular prints as well as the digital prints, and some of the prints actually have an adhesive, so they stick to the wall like wallpaper. So for this work, I'm kind of thinking about presence and absence in nature. So it's like, what is there, what is not there, and just thinking about how technology has kind of allowed us to become more intimate with nature, but also separated us from a lot of different things. So we kind of always have this screen as an intermediary when we're like going outside and interacting with spaces. So here's a close-up of that work. So once again, I'm kind of using one of the patterns that I've used before. I like to kind of have like a mother pattern that I use within my work and gets repeated a lot. So the black and white pattern's kind of been like my mother pattern for this body of work. So jumping to one of the other pieces that's at fresh squeezed, this is Devonian. So this work is a mix of oil and acrylic paint on wood panel. The panels themselves I CNC routed, so they're these really funky shapes. And then I've adhered together, and the window that's in the center is acrylic that I've laser cut. So this work was inspired by fossilized coral that I found in Iowa City, Iowa. I was working on a mural project at the Stanley Museum up there. And one of the people I was working with, they were like, there's this really cool fossil gorge that's like 20 minutes away. And I was like, that's really incredible. What kind of fossils? And he's like, coral. I'm like, okay, we have to go now. So we took an Uber to this fossil gorge, and we're just being little gremlins in this gorge. And there's like families and all these people like picking up pieces of fossilized coral. And I found this really funky bit that's about the size of my palm. And I was just obsessed with this piece of coral. And I'm like, I have to do a painting based on this. So that's where this painting came from. So it has some mixed media. So I have a little piece of lenticular, and then I have some digital printing as well as the painting itself. So kind of playing with mixed media here. So going into some of my smaller lenticular pieces that are currently at the Morean Art Center. So the piece on the left is Orchidea, and then the one on the right is Planella. So a lot of the naming for the smaller works are inspired by some of the Latin scientific terms that I'm seeing, or a lot of the things I'm looking at. So something I've been thinking about a lot recently is just orchids that are native to Florida. So the piece on the left is a scientific term for a type of orchid that's in Florida. For these works, I'm actually using a lot of laser cut acrylic to create surfaces as well as wood. So I'm playing with textured acrylic and laser cutting the lenticulars to create these forms. So this is another work that I created for Fresh Squeezed. This is Nemocite. So that's actually the stinging part of coral. So kind of a stinging cell. And I was just really intrigued by the shape of those, if you look at diagrams, and the colors of coral. So for this work, I was really thinking about that. And I was watching 2001 Space Odyssey, and I was very like, I like how Stanley Kubrick is creating these really interesting like scenes with this really specific palette. So I kind of combined that with some of the colors I'm thinking of from coral. So here's some of the smaller lenticular pieces installed at Memorian, just so you can kind of get an idea how they look together. So I really love the way they're kind of hung salon style, and it's kind of funky. You get to see the kind of edge glow that I'm getting from the acrylic with the lenticulars. So this is another piece of the work that I'm showing at Memorial. So I didn't really show too much of it, but all of my bigger installation pieces and the lenticular pieces start from these abstract paintings on wood panel. So these are some of the wood panel paintings that I created that led into my lenticular pieces and the installation works. So from these, I usually scan them, and then I'll take patterns and the colors that I'm seeing here, and I'll either glitch them by breaking the code in the image, or I'll just take them and use them as pure pattern. So I like showing them, and I really love color. So these give me a nice chance to experiment with color in forms before I commit to it on like a printed piece or within a collage. So here's the installation works installed all together at Memorial. It was really fun getting to talk to them during the studio visits and really think about how I wanted to see these works installed. And they were like, "We have a vision." And I'm like, "Yes, that sounds amazing. Let's do that." So it came out really incredible. But the pieces in this versus the images I showed earlier, you're starting to see the pieces drip onto the floor and really become a part of the space. So viewers can interact with it and get to see the work from different angles. So going a little bit past the work at the Morian, after the Morian show opened, my MFA show at Florida State University opened. And this is my work that was shown alongside my cohort at the Florida State Museum of Fine Art. So for this work, it's 25 feet by 12 feet, and then it's 4 feet deep. For this piece, I hand painted the wall. So the wall is light blue. And then I painted this white reef form on top of it. And then I used different digitally printed components to almost collage shapes and forms onto the wall. And then I had created these paintings that were kind of responding to my last series that's on view at the Morian. And I created this new work that's really thinking more about coral and how we interact with the environment. So here's a picture from the opening, just so you can kind of see the scale of the work. So within this piece, I'm really playing with space and thinking about how things are layered and how colors are sitting on top of one another. So this is a nice side angle because you can kind of see the depth of the work and then how I'm treating surfaces. So all of my bigger installation paintings all have velvet flocking on the edges. So you can kind of see that here. So this is a work that's from my thesis show. This is Corallium. So this is just a piece by itself. So my work's modular, so it can kind of go from being in a bigger installation setting to being shown on its own. So this is another work from my thesis. This is Fossil Record. This actually directly shows some of the things that I'm thinking about in the work. So I actually have shark teeth in it, fossilized coral, shells, and sand, which is a bizarre thing to put in a painting, but I really wanted to show some of the things that I'm thinking about very directly with this work. And I go and look for shark's teeth all the time on the beaches in St. Augustine. So I wanted that to be apparent in the work, but that's something else I'm thinking about. And then coming up, I actually, the day after the show at the Morian closes, I actually have a show opening at the Bradbury Art Museum at Arkansas State University, which I'm really excited about. The curator's been really amazing. And we're showing all of the paintings from my thesis just on their own without the elements of installation. And then tomorrow, I'm actually leaving for Greece I received a partial fellowship from Mud House in Crete, Greece, and I'm going to work on a new body of work um, there for 2 weeks. So I'm excited to see what's next. And with that, I wanted to close with one of my favorite quotes, just thinking about world building. So it matters what matters we used to think others matters with. It matters what stories we tell to tell others stories with. It matters what knots, not knots, what thoughts think thoughts, what descriptions describe descriptions, what ties tie ties. It matters what stories make worlds, what worlds make stories. So thank you so much.
Thanks, Hannah. That was amazing. I have lots of questions, but I'll wait. I'll type them in the chat.
Thank you.
And I'm glad you mentioned that pink color too, because yeah, when we visited Hannah's studio, she had that fabulous pink as the backdrop to some of her work. And we always use a different accent color every time we do Fresh Squeezed or any show really. And I hadn't picked it yet. And we saw that and thought it was crazy, but it actually worked. I think there was one artist that we had to do something else, but it's a good segue into Ryan because his work looks amazing with that color as well. So thank you, Hannah. All right, Ryan, are you ready?
I am ready. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. Get to the technicalities. Okay. All right, so I'm sharing my screen. Okay. Well, I want to say it was a hard act to follow. Thanks, Hannah. I appreciated being in the show with you. And I want to say thank you, Maureen and Amanda Cooper, for, having just the vision to put this show together with like all the other amazing artists. It was a really great experience and it's paying off and I love it. And everything looked great in the space. And so it's been amazing. Because I'm a little bit awkward when I'm going on screen. I'm gonna have my glasses on. I'm gonna read a little bit, but then I'm gonna kind of go off-road and kind of just go through all this. But let's see here. Starting off with Fresh Squeeze 9. So, whoops. There we go. So just did my thank yous. And for those of you that weren't able to see the show, because I know it was in St. Pete, which was beautiful, I just wanted to go through and review the work that was curated and chosen for the space. So you can kind of get an idea of the layout of the space. So you walk in, and the thing that everybody sees is the giant alligator in the middle of the room. And what's kind of funny with that is that wasn't initially in the proposal. It was supposed to be completely different, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So the first piece in here is Freshly Squeezed Out, which ironically was named before I applied for the show Fresh Squeezed. So I was calling Fresh Squeezed Freshly Squeezed for a long time. But it's acrylic and mixed media on paper, and I did that last year. And this was kind of like the first piece that I made that started off the launch of this idea about feeling both native and invasive at the same time. So I grew up in Florida. I had lived in Florida my whole life. I went to school in Cooper Union, went to New York when I was 18. So that was in 98. And then I was there for a bit and then I came back and then I went back again. But when I finally came back for the last time, I had my family with me and everything had changed. This was post-COVID. So I had this feeling of no longer myself coming back to this place, but I had my family as well, which were very supportive. My one child was 3 weeks old. My wife was a New Jersey native and we met in New York. So just the idea of like coming back to this place that was familiar but no longer familiar at the same time was kind of interesting, and especially specifically in West Palm Beach. It's kind of a tale of two cities. It's always been, where you have everything across the bridge, where you have this huge amount of money, and then you have everybody that's over here. which kind of just fill out the rest of the space. But things have changed quite a bit. So it was this feeling of bringing my family and having this idea that even though I was native and my family was all here, we felt somewhat invasive. And so playing around with that kind of launched the rest of the series. And I didn't know where I was going with it yet. I think that's usually with most ideas, you don't know where you're going to go with it. But it just kept developing. Here's another piece that's in the show. It's the Sunbathers. Another one, Hard Reset. Horn of Plenty. Hold My Beers. Get Off My Lawn. There's a close-up of Get Off My Lawn. And you'll see a lot of details in here that I'm going to talk a little bit about later, and inspirations and influences and how they kind of come together full circle. Here's a couple of great shots that were collected from the Maureen and myself putting it together. Here are a couple of smaller drawings that came in. And then just showing the dates. And then my kids who have been extra supportive. Whoops. All right. So I'm gonna go through my notes. So I was kind of thinking about this talk, and I wanted to just talk about the work that was in the show, but then I felt that I wasn't really giving the 45 years of my process that I put together real justice by doing that. I use a lot of analogies and metaphors when I teach. And a lot of the things that I do is I put them together, and I put these thoughts together. And one of them is that I felt like I've been collecting all of these really cool ingredients for the last 45 years of my life, and I haven't really known how to put them together. So kind of like a good chef, I've had them. And then it really hasn't been until the last year that, or even 6 months, I would say, that I really kind of figured out what to do with them. So I want to begin by kind of going through and talking about where are we? What I do. So I kind of opened up this giant Florida sinkhole of things, and in a way, I put myself on a couch to really give my time to evaluate my direction. Not just for this talk, but the main question is, why do I do what I do? So I teach AP drawing at an arts high school, and the first question I asked them in the beginning of the year is, are you a maximalist or a minimalist? So you start here, and then you get to address your own aesthetics and your own systems, your own process, and this ultimately addresses and lays out your own foundation for how you prefer to exist and operate in your lifetime. So my parents were big collectors. Some would say borderline hoarders. My father collected postcards, stamps, Victrolas, and coins, and my mom, she collected thousands of dolls. So in every room, they were all looking at you, and it's no wonder I inherited this passion for collecting myself. So my family and upbringing was also a collected effort. I'm the youngest by 7 years of 5 kids. So I spent the first part of my childhood spoiled and surrounded by this organized chaos. And we were kind of a Brady Bunch family, but a little bit more complicated than that. My father had 2 adopted kids from a previous marriage, and my mom was a recent widow and had 2 children of her own. And together they had me, and we kind of found this balance together. And this kind of all came together. So dysfunctional, absolutely. Loving, yes. My existence sometimes felt like a pecking order. I wanted attention, but so did everyone else. And I don't think we understood that at the time because we were just kids. So the reason why I say that is because I feel that everything has kind of been collective, and it took me a while to understand what that meant, like with all of us together, and the fact that we all were competing for attention and wanting to belong. And that became relevant more in the work that I was putting together. So I was lucky enough to grow up in a time where, every fast food restaurant had playgrounds, toy stores were the size of Costco's, network TV carved out time for our cartoons, and we used our imagination. It wasn't just encouraged, it was our jobs. So my parents could exist in those same places with us, and it just felt like there was this great balance. So the reason why I mention all of this is not just to talk about my upbringing, but because after, again, my lifetime of collecting all these ingredients, I realized that this is important to my work, my thoughts, my process, how I operate, and how I raise my own children, and how I teach, and generally who I am as a person, as an artist, how I exist. Um, so moving on with my origin story, you can see there's little me. That's a work from high school. And then that is actually a doll that my mom had created. I asked her, I said, "Hey, can you send me something, that you put together? And I want to go into the artistic practices." Because people ask me all the time where I get my talent from. And my parents always say maybe my grandparents. But honestly, circling back to the creepy dolls, my mom also made her own porcelain dolls. So at this time, her studio was a place of nightmares. Where I was a kid, she had cabinets of glass eyes and molds of limbs, wigs strewn about. But I remember, that it was also a creative spot for her. She had a giant kiln. I remember her putting everything together. At one point, she made a doll of me and likeness and, my friend. But she had a passion for this. And so, this passion, I feel like having a passion for anything qualifies you as an artist. And she later took her gifts and imagination, became a kindergarten teacher. So, excuse me, that really inspired me as well. My father was a Korean War Navy veteran and was a salesman for pharmaceutical company. And I used to say that he sold drugs in school, and everybody's like, "What?" But it again, not having any understanding. But he also had a passion for what he did, and he was a little bit older. He was 48 when he had me, but I respected him because he never vocalized anything he couldn't do. He's still in his 90s, always talks about what he can do and what he does want to do. And sharing his amazing stories, this was a passion of his, and so therefore it kind of translates to the idea of being an artist. So, I came from a family of artists, if you want to put it that way. Okay, so let me go to the next thing. All right, so there we are, $1,000, but passion. Okay, so I want to go into some of my inspirational influences because I know that's pretty important. Whenever I hear an artist talk about work that I'm interested in, I'm wondering where they're getting their influences outside of their own existence and family life. So I had this little YouTube thing on there, and it's all about Thundercats and the intro to that because that was really cool because I grew up in this maximalist, 80s environment where, we were just bathed in this kind of colorful consumerism, and I felt like at the time that it was, catered to us. And then, of course, we have this illuminated manuscript here. And this becomes important because I've always been drawn to the aesthetics of, illuminated manuscripts and specifically bestiaries. But as I've kind of researched it more and my practice has matured and developed, it's become a little more relevant. So, just like with the bestiaries, there's several different bestiaries that exist, in all different countries, different times. But, generally each animal is this allegory or this representation of, people, their own thoughts, their own ideals. In the bestiaries, the alligator or the crocodile usually is this, glutton character, consumes a lot. The flamingo doesn't really exist, but it's the pelican. It's kind of this rebirth. People are always kind of the hedonist, or they exist in this world. The python is usually depicted as evil, and then iguanas. I don't think they had those there, but in my world, making my own allegories for this stuff, and we go back to it. I decided I wanted to adopt the idea of my own Florida culture, and integrate them together with all these different characters. So the characters that I kind of played around with and adapted are the alligator is a true native. It's never changing. It's been there for forever. It'll be that way. It's kind of stuck on how it exists. The flamingo is clumsy, but it's also the inspiration for the phoenix. So if you look at some of the bestiaries where they're talking about that, they say that the bright plumage of the flamingo and the fact that it exists in just the most aggressive environments like the edges of a volcano where nothing else can go over. It kind of took on the idea of something that can exist in this environment, and then took on the idea of the phoenix. And then the people are the the people are the tourists, the hedonistic. They're kind of oblivious. The pythons are the invasive. They kind of squeeze out, and the iguanas just kind of don't give a crap. They're the survivors, and they're the ones that will always adapt. So I was kind of using all these different characters, and you could see them, and I'll go into it a little bit more with my work, as ways of like autobiographical allegories that I'm applying myself. So I wrote a little bit about the illuminated manuscripts. And so I've never been to Europe. And a lot of my ideas, here we are, a lot of the places that I've been to only exist in fabrications. And this becomes really relevant to me because you can see this is Epcot and this is medieval times. But our vacations as a family was always, let's go to Disney World. And then there's a sort of interesting connection and duality that I wanted to explore with my own past in these fabricated environments and our own existence. So these kind of fantastical representations, as well as these ideas of dioramas. So when I was in school and I went to New York, one of my places that I really loved to go was a museum of natural history. There is this calmness where you can see that as a bunch of different windows, and it was escapism for me. So here I am as a young kid with my family who is all over the place. We all have different interests. We're all doing something. We take these vacations. We're talking about these fantastical places that are mere representations and fabrications. And then I go to college, and then I'm in New York City. And then again, my escapism is these beautiful Carl Akeley dioramas that were created, where each one kind of like opens up this extra world. So in a way, one of the representations I have here is, when you look at the bestiary books, they kind of use these scare tactics. Scare tactics. And the way that the manuscripts worked at the time was they were kind of a little bit like scare tactics for people that weren't necessarily educated. So in a way, you would flip it open and you would see that this character would represent this way and this character represent this way. But in a way, it was saying that either you obey or you suffer this fate. And this kind of exists today in a way where people don't necessarily check the facts first, because we're living in a world of AI, we're living in a world of social media where things are handed to you. So I found that really interesting. Again, this kind of duality that is coming on. And one of these characters, which, I've never seen an elephant, but I can describe to you that sort of thing. But you can see like this character here is just this bonacon that doesn't exist in real life, but it's this weird potty humor representation of this bovine character that exists in this world. And then if you don't do necessarily what you're supposed to, there'll be consequences. In this case, it had fiery bowel movements that would burn anybody that would get in the way. So this kind of goes back to the idea of 9/11 for me. And I know it sounds like I'm jumping around, but this isn't just a day, but this was something that years and decades that people would used to ask me to describe what happened on that day. And so it kind of goes back to the Bonacon, where I really didn't know how to describe it. And so this is a way that I can kind of like cope with things because again, for like decades, people were saying, tell me about that day. And we all saw it on TV and we all have a unique perspective on it. That was something that people wanted to hear, but I didn't know the answer of how to actually share like my experiences. So I didn't know. And I feel like just a bunch of feelings, I was trying to figure it out. So anytime anything happened in my life since then that I had no control over, I couldn't explain, I went back to these illuminated manuscripts. Um, and then one of the series that I have, and you can see just going back to these with everything, and you see the duality of how it's coming in. And then again, this is going to believing what people see because these were usually animals that people didn't see at the time. And so they're just trusting people's descriptions and write-ups and then artistic interpretations. So believe what I tell you. And you can see how they're all arranged. So taking all of that, when I wasn't able to really comfortably portray what I wanted to say about how I was feeling, I would go back to the inspiration of medieval art. In this case, this was a time of my life when I was trying, excuse me, when I was trying to figure out an event that happened to me. Also, something that was distinctly Florida. This was a Spanish Tarzan tiger. So this was the guy that was a Spanish version of Tarzan. And excuse me. His story was is that he lived out in the acreage not far from where I live now. And he had a bunch of cats, wild cats that he would keep in cages. And he would even sleep with these animals. And he was known as this macho sort of guy. But what happened was one of these animals got loose and they wandered all around, the county. And there's this lookout of this tiger that was loose and they're having all these different spottings. But, long story short, what eventually happened was that this tiger was hunted down. He was caught, he was killed, he was disposed of. And then I kind of took that idea of that story and then I escalated it to include some of my own narrative. But I set this up in the same 5 panel stories, just like the unicorn hunt. And so you can see each one of these where it starts off as, the tiger at home, comfortable. Then it starts off as a capture of the tiger. And then it's a skinning of the tiger. Then it's a separation of the tiger and being shipped off somewhere else. And then eventually it's the separation of the tiger, the skeleton, and the skin together. There's just a recent piece that I did that kind of shows the idea of doing mixed media and taking the hierarchy and the totemic ideas of the animals. So kind of a modern day 20th century interpretation of the illuminated manuscripts, and something that like I used to see a lot being in Florida and going on road trips and whatnot would be these circus freak show posters as well as billboards, things that you would see. So it was kind of like this modern interpretation and also layout of how you see these characters that are being presented. And also coming back to that sort of like curiosity of this happened to you at one point, I want to hear about it, and that sort of curiosity. William Blake, also somebody that I'm completely like enamored with. And yeah, so William Blake is somebody too that like they didn't just go, it's not like, Paul Rubens or, where they're going into, just doing religious interpretations or religious depictions, but he kind of created his own allegories, his own religion. And there's these small, like really beautiful, intricate watercolors. And just again, it's like just bringing in this sort of history. So all this stuff kind of together has been, pretty inspirational. which is going to a piece that's not in the Morian, but something that was just completed. But this is the dog walker. So you can kind of get the sense of, again, all those characters that I was speaking about earlier, the alligator, python, the hedonist, tourist, but they all kind of exist in this space. So it's really all about feeling that you need to belong. Everybody wants to belong. What becomes really important in my work is that, yes, it is Florida centric, but it's about the idea that Florida isn't a place, it's become a condition, and that it's just no longer, it used to be where something weird would happen and everybody would say, oh, that either happened in Florida or it happened in Texas. It happened a lot when I was in New York, but I feel that everywhere is Florida now, because I'm starting to play around with the idea that all of this work is using these sort of symbolic characters, but they're kind of becoming this microcosm of what's going on in the rest of the world, especially in this country. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. I wouldn't say that I identify with any of the characters, but I don't like any of the characters either. They're all there, they all exist in this space. They're kind of competing, and it's really like at the heart of it, this work has evolved to the sense of just feeling of belonging. And it goes back to all the things that I kind of showed and was playing around with. And you can see that here, this is just, going back to William Blake and, the manuscripts and the rubber band and the little doll. It's all about how, we can put these all together, and also, compositionally, but in terms of idea, like the passion that we put forth. So this is just real quick. This is development of work. So this is going back to college. I had to think. I was like, did I always like use this sort of chaotic environment? I think I've leaned into chaos quite a bit, and I had to ask myself, did this happen because of 9/11, or had this always existed? And the reason why I talked about my family before, because I think we had so many of us, and we all just were talking about belonging and existence, that there was this sort of loving chaos. Um, and I think that that made its way into its work. So this stuff came out probably a month. Well, the colorful stuff was a month after 9/11. And then the larger work, again, addressing those dioramas, which I used to, use as escapism. There's these giant, like 9x12 pieces. I wanted to feel like you can walk into them. So that was kind of developing that way. Let's see, that's just some more. These are these giant windows. Again, I brought in the kind of hyenas and African wild dogs, but these were gigantic. They were drawings. So it was also at the beginning where I was trying to figure out, am I a draftsman or am I a painter? And can I be both? Kind of going back to the cheeky, idea of the old manuscripts and etchings, and this was a larger piece, thinking about vulnerabilities, showing things that, you have, you know, you have an existence where you're nurturing, but also you're vulnerable while you do that. I want to bring this up because this was a piece, Kara Walker Tomei, I think, who is on this call, had curated these wonderful shows, these pop-up shows, and this one was at a hotel where each individual room was this space that you would walk into. And I really liked the show because it gave me a chance to explore the idea that this was another continuation of a diorama, bringing in that idea of education, entertainment, the fabricated environment, being able to educate, but having fun with it. So at the time, a lot of things after 9/11, I taught myself how to, do natural history, taxidermy, osteology, and this will kind of come to fruition later. But I wanted to create this fun piece that wasn't going to be sensational, because I have no interest in making sensational pieces. I want them to be kind of like a slow burn. And so this one was a science of sex and sleep. And yes, you can see it. It's obvious that you have these two sheep that are within this hotel room, and the idea that this used to be a seedy, motel. But what you don't see is that on the screen there was, a rotation of facts about animals, reproductive and sleep patterns. And so people would come in and they'd look through these windows and then they'd hear Kenny G playing and they would see all these facts that would kind of come in and they were just, educating them and entertaining them at the same time. Um, she was not happy at the time, and I promised her that I wasn't trying to, shock. And this is just kind of some quick development of side gigs that I went off and did. So I've always had this interest in like doing taxidermy and natural history and stuff like that. All right, so the making of the idea and the chaos. So I'm not even going to go into all the old work because I'm old enough that I have a lot of it and we'd be here forever. But you can see that themes, like different series, but they always kind of come back. For a while, I did this Final Paint series, and it basically was just a way of me letting go and not taking accountability for what people would see with my work. I was kind of creating these Rorschach tests, in a way, these ink blots, where for me it was just a way of to explore how to paint, pouring paint, really just experimenting and doing different things. But I realized putting them together in these kind of like organic forms, like there are these organisms, people were seeing different things in them. And so it was interesting to see what people would take away depending on how they were feeling. Um, and then kind of moving on to this one, after that, I went into figurative work again. And you can see that this one was in 2016, and it's kind of a revision of it. This was this giant rat tail, this giant rat king with all these tails mixed in. And this was kind of an inspiration that I revised and I went back in for the piece in the Morian. Now the piece here, the flamingo piece is talking about the phoenixes. They're in a rat king of themselves, so all of their heads are kind of tangled in together. Um, and the idea that they're all stuck and that the only way out is to really incinerate and start over. Okay, so influences. I just want to thank all my teachers, Connie Rudy, Jane Grandusky, Day Gleason, Erwin Rubin. These were all teachers that were really influential in my own work and what brought me into teaching. And then the real process. So let's go into mastermind. I'll go through this pretty quickly. So as a parent, I'm trying to juggle the fact that I exist and I'm a teacher, I'm a parent, but I'm artist as well. So the way to kind of bridge that gap is I have my kids kind of take part in all this. And so I let them go and they kind of create this ground. And you can see where the beginning is. And so I had my oldest kid just kind of just go to town on this and do her thing. And then you can see that from that, I was able to play around with editing, containing, keeping what was fresh, taking away what wasn't needed, and then kind of creating this piece. So in a way, it was kind of continuation of how I work, my own children kind of putting everything into it. And you can see that she's the real boss because this was at an opening. She was telling everybody that that was her piece because it is. She was definitely the inspiration for that. All right, so the end or the alligator in the room. So I just want to go in and talk about that alligator. So here is the maquette for that. And this is at the Morian. And initially, this was a sketch that I submitted for the proposal, and you can see that it looks a lot different. When I was selected for this, I was like, oh crap, I have to put together this giant piece now. So that was kind of cool. But I want to thank Allison, and this is their website for Morgue Made, because when that happened, I had to reach out to somebody and I was like, I'm gonna need an alligator, and do you have like an alligator head that I can use? And she said, I actually have a 10-foot alligator in my freezer. So she really helped out with that. That was a piece. When I had to communicate with her, 500 miles away, I made that maquette sketches, and she really was able to take that idea and put it together. You can see again some connections between the bestiaries and then close-ups of the sculpture. And then one thing to kind of wrap it up that you can see that I put in all my pieces is that the pattern that I use is very Harlequin-esque. So it's about this performer. It could be the fool, it could be however you want to interpret it, but these diamonds are a way that there's a sort of performative aspect of it that integrates itself into all the work. And these are some new pieces, that I'm putting in there, but you can kind of see that, the twins over here kind of go back to the idea of 9/11, go back to just things that are constantly reoccurring, and then some other inspirational pieces. And then the process, I don't draw from photographs. I'll draw from life, and then I'll kind of filter everything through. And you can see that these are all the different processes. Okay, and I think that's it.
Awesome. Thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, no problem.
So we do have one question so far in the chat. Please feel free to write more in there. But I did want to ask, oh, and Ryan, great presentation. However, where's the photo of the Ryan doll?
The Ryan doll. I might have, when I was younger, might have broken it when I was sweeping or vacuuming.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know how that happened.
All right. All right. Well, I was all geared up to see it and then let down, but great job otherwise. I have two questions for you, Hannah. Are you with us still, Hannah?
Yeah.
Okay. Ryan, you can stop sharing your screen. So you just finished an MFA program at FSU where you had access to all these fabulous machines. I'm assuming you don't have personal ones. I was wondering how you not having access to that equipment will change your work going forward, or it won't.
Yeah, of course. So I actually, before starting my MFA, I did a lot of pieces. I was using a jigsaw to cut,
Mm.
and I was fabricating a lot of panels myself. Um, so just a little bit lower tech. So I think I'm going to go back to doing that with a lot of our work. But I also have been trying to communicate with fabrication shops and work on getting access to CNC routers in case I need it for larger work. And over the course of this summer, after I kind of organized my studio space a little bit more at home, I'm gonna get a laser cutter. So
All right.
feel
Good
good.
to know. And also, you mentioned a mural that you did. Do you do those regularly? Is that something you want to do more of, or that was like a one-time thing?
Yeah, I actually one of the professors I was on my thesis committee, Jiha Moon, she asked me and another MFA student last summer to help her with a mural. So she did a mural at the Stanley Museum right when you walk in, and it's a mix of her painting, so painting on the wall, and then wheat pasting, and it actually has a bunch of really big ceramic masks. So she was like, "You're really good at like wheat paste and wallpaper. Can you please help me with all the wheat pasted components and get all of that, and then some of the tighter details like on our mural?" She would kind of like point at things and be like, "Please fill this in this way," and I would be like, "Yes." So it was me working on her mural and kind of helping her do stuff like that.
Okay.
So I would like to do more permanent installations in the future, um, but I'm trying to kind of figure out how I would want to do that and propose that.
I mean, I can see the transition to that because your work is so, large scale. And, we have a big mural festival here in St. Pete every year. So I always am thinking about that. So cool. Let me see the question in the chat. I'm not sure, this might be addressed to Ryan. I'm not sure. Maria asks or says, you have such a unique approach to color, especially in this more recent series of work. Can you talk a little bit about how you choose and develop your palette? It was typed during your talk, Ryan, so I think that's for you.
All right. Yeah, so the color, I mean, color always kind of changes where you live. When I lived up in New York, you know, it was more filtered and just, but moving down here, it's just the light is so saturated that I've always been just really, I guess, attracted to bright colors, but also just the way that I see it. Like I guess I have to see saturated color. So just recently I found out that I have kind of like the beginning of macular degeneration. So it has to be saturated in order for me to kind of address it. But also, you know, again, going back to college, I had this great professor, you know, Erwin Rubin, who was a student of, you know, Joseph Albers. And so it really taught how to kind of like put color combinations together and how to, you know, aggressively or subtly, you know, make color work, you know, in your advantage. And then again, as my little kid says, it's like Lily Pulitzer in a hurricane. So kind of pulling in these tropical patterns, you know, these bright like colors of just what I grew up with and, you know, the 80s cartoons and everything. But also just the sort of distinct Florida palette that, you know, hopefully transcends to, you know, other people that's not just Florida.
I was interested in your the Phylum of Paint series because it had it reminded me a little bit of Hannah's work, just the organisms and the looking like it came from nature, but you didn't really know what it was. I just thought of that when I saw the images of that series. Is there any other questions? Y'all are a quiet bunch. Okay. Well, I guess that's it then. If again, Fresh Squeezed is up through June 28th. So if you're in the St. Pete area, please come see it in person. It's great to be able to do this when you know there's a distance, but if you can come visit us in person, it's always great to see the work in the flesh. And if you know of somebody who was interested in being part of this talk, but they couldn't come this evening, then we'll have this link up on our YouTube channel in about a week, so you can share it with them, and we'll have it up on our website too. So thank you again, everybody, for joining us tonight. And thank you to Ryan and to Hannah for being in the show. You guys are amazing. We've had such a great response to your work. I mean, both of you really it's very immersive when you come in here and see both of you right at the same time together. It's been an honor to work with you both. So that's it. And all right. Any last words, you two?
Thank you so much for having us. It's been an amazing experience, and I really enjoyed getting to work with you and with Allison and June, and just really see the show come together. So I'm really gonna be sad when it comes down.
I know. Not yet. We won't talk about that yet. Lots of comments in the chat saying great work, everyone. So I want to share that. Well, all right. That's it. Thank you very much, guys. Well, I'll see you two soon. Take care.